After 500 hours of playing Granblue, I finally figured out what the game needs. Now, of course, this is just my opinion, but after enduring death, after boss fight, after failed achievement, after failed farming, after tireless, endless grinding, I have a pretty good grasp of what things are frustrating to play in this game and what just kind of feels bad. So today I'm going to talk about things that I hope are going to get fixed about the game, things that I hope to see in the future. Let's get into it. So the first thing that I think most people at this point, especially if you hit the end game, are kind of sick and tired of or wish that there was a change for, yeah, you probably guessed this already, it's the 10 times summon for sigils. Now, to be clear with this menu, I definitely know that even if I were to summon 10 or 20 or 30, there would probably come a time where I would want something like a custom amount that I'd like to summon by, i.e. 100, 150. I don't know if you just keep continuously farming up, sigils entirely. But long story short, I feel like there definitely should be something, especially for the level 3 transmutation or the transmorph, that allows you to increase the number of summonable sigils or right stones all at the same time. A quality of life fix to something like this would go a long way. In the same vein, something that I also think needs to get increased is the knickknack voucher cap. Now, as it is right now, you can hold a total of 999, which also kind of irks me because 999 means that you can't get a perfect 40 summons. However, just in general, I think that getting to 1,000, especially once you start selling stuff like your treasures or you start selling your random old sigils, basically means that you hit the cap for knickknack vouchers almost instantly, especially in the late game. And of course, alongside the 10 times sigil summon, these two would pair very well together. And in all honesty, it already takes a long time to farm out for a lot of these things. Spending even more time to try to organize or rearrange your inventory because you don't have enough knickknack vouchers or you don't have the room to summon is just ridiculous. Inventory size definitely needs a fix. The next thing on the list definitely comes as no surprise to a lot of you guys. Damage cap is really important. However, something that I don't think people are talking about enough is just how restrictive or limiting damage cap can be, especially when you're trying to make a diverse build. Since you are forced to get 65 damage cap, it does limit your defensive options and it also does limit some of your offensive options. I've seen plenty of builds where people want to have something like supplementary damage 5, they also want to get 65 damage cap, and usually that means that if they're trying to fit certain utilities like quick cooldown or cascade, they miss out on something like stout heart, or if they do have stout heart and something like steel nerfs, they miss out on something like nimble onslaught. Long story short, I understand the idea behind the damage cap and why it's important to have it, but just by the way that people treat damage cap right now, it feels more like a tax more so than a creative liberty or a creative kind of build that people are trying to take. And considering the fact that you need 4 damage cap sigils and the terminus weapon with the sigil and like the damage cap boost built in, 65 is pretty ridiculous for a trait. And given how much investment in traits and sub traits that you need to actually commit to in order to hit 65 or your damage cap, it feels fair to say that this doesn't really add any complexity or any interesting aspect to the game. As I mentioned at the very beginning, it's just a tax. Everyone has to do it if they want to hit max damage. I don't think that's very healthy. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that removing damage cap entirely is the right play, and in all honesty, I'm not even sure if people would necessarily deviate away from the damage cap kind of meta that we have right now anyways, just because most people are kind of just playing at whatever they want and at their own leisure, casually. If they overcap, it is what it is. But I do think that having a bit more of a forgivable kind of build path or allowing more creative builds is definitely a right direction to go down. On the topic of uncapping things, I definitely also think that the mastery points that you accrue is also really low relative to what you're farming. If you guys are doing Slime Pete or if you're just going through the story, you'll remember that you gain upwards of sometimes 1,000, 1,500, even 2,000 mastery points in a single run. Long story short though, there's no reason to continue capping a lot of resources. Like, you can cap it up to a certain degree, but either the accessibility of using resources or using these resources in a meaningful way, i.e. adding a 10 times craft for the sigils, pretty much means that as it is right now, we need to increase the cap of everything so that the experience doesn't feel like I'm trying to sell items or sell sigils every single run because I max out and I'm full on inventory. Long story short, the experience should be seamless. It shouldn't be too cluttered. It should basically make you feel good or kind of make sense to you without needing too much explanation. And while other aspects of the game definitely make you feel that way, it is a little bit less so when you start capping resources. The next thing that I definitely think that Cygames need to adjust and work on is definitely the sorting in this game. Something like being able to sort by the main stat or the main trait that you already have, being able to sort by an alphabetical filter. Things like these are what actually need changes. And let me just bring up a few other gripes that I have with the sorting system, because there are a few and they are kind of blatant. One of my biggest pet peeves, or one of the things that I've found to be especially annoying when it comes to sorting, or things relating to sorting and like the selection system, is that although you could definitely sort by the trade-in and then have something where you select all the sigils, and as you can see, it says that I'm selecting 86 sigils to voucher, to trade in for vouchers. This is actually not the case for the right stones, and even though sometimes you can get a load of right stones, in this case, the menu is not even there, and so if you want to sell things out of this, you just have to manually sit there and sell it. Long story short, the way that you select through things, you parse through things, or you search, or you filter can definitely be adjusted, and hopefully Cygames understands that ultimately the way that you sort or that you move through menus is extremely important. If it gets convoluted and cluttered, a lot of players will kind of just forego paying attention to these things anyways. Another quality of life that I definitely feel would help out a lot of people is that if you're familiar with the kind of crafting system, if you craft something like I've crafted right now, you see that it's lucky charge 4+, you see that it has attack, but unfortunately, especially from this menu right now, there is no way to lock the sigil itself, and if you're, farming out a lot of sigils, that may be an issue. And again, from this menu, there should be a lock that allows me to lock the sigil. The system should just be that you're able to lock the items as soon as you get them. It doesn't really make sense. Another thing that definitely needs a little bit work is the open queue. The way that it works is that if you happen to be in a squad of 4, if you've just beaten up a boss, you do have the ability to queue up with the same people that you've already been queued up with, or you can go back, or something in between. But again, it would be nice if for open queue, all you had to do was just have the one person leave, and then the remaining people that decided to play with each other are all either kind of plopped into like a lobby together, or you can play together, or you are like in direct contact with each other. Because if it's just a one person kind of deal where this is the only time that something like this happens, where everyone has to back out and then re-queue into each other if they want to meet each other again, it kind of stinks. Another major thing that they really need to talk about when it comes to Granblue Fantasy is that the drop tables for bosses aren't even consistent. And so again, if you decide to farm up Melting Pot of Hostility, you'll actually find that what it says that you have access to here, or the things that you can actually get as drops, are Tyranny, Skilled Assault, and Concentrated Fire. But what it actually should say is that you have access to Tyranny 5+, as well as Damage Cap Plus, and these are really important things while you're trying to progress and grow stronger in things for the game. Long story short, if there's already wikis for other games, there's wikis for hundreds of games, why is there not a more reliable wiki that tells me exactly what each of the characters drops? Okay, so for camera changes, if you aren't already familiar with it, there's a couple ways that the camera gets adjusted. There are certain settings, like, again, you have like the camera sensitivity, you have it so that the camera will reposition, or like during certain phases, whether it's combat or idle, the camera will look different. And while I definitely agree that in certain cases it's better for the camera to be a little bit more dynamic, or more heavy, or more like hard feeling, it would be nice to have opportunities to just not have that, and have some stages or certain phases where things don't have to be that hardcore. Unfortunately though, as it is right now, all you have access to when it comes to camera things are just kind of making the camera go a little bit slower, and I guess making you a little bit better and aware of like what's behind you. Next, the thing that I do think could use a little bit of love and adjusting is definitely talking about the keybind changes. Again, as it is right now, certain things are definitely fine, but I definitely don't think that the lock-on buttons, especially on PC, are super great. But in all actuality, of the things that I would definitely kind of change when it comes to keybind changes is definitely kind of changing the interact button, like where that is, like kind of the characters that I'm trying to portray and have some value in. Okay, but when it comes to keybind changes, something that I definitely think needs to get adjusted a little bit is kind of like what you have access to change, whether that's your role, your damage abilities, whichever it is. So the way that you use skills on PC is definitely different from the way that you use skills on controller or anything like that. And the fact that you can't rebind these things so that you can do something like your ultimate without having to press both analog sticks could be really nice, and I definitely think it is worth noting. But just in general, for people that want to play differently or don't want to conform to the normal kind of like WASD format, this would be definitely something of a nice gesture that you can kind of work on. In terms of priority though, I know this definitely kind of comes down below, aside from, or among new content or other pressing issues. The other thing that I think is pretty worth talking about is kind of what AI are inclined to do, especially when they're on your team. Now, for the sake of both arguments, I will talk about progression and speedrunning, but for speedrunning, sometimes you really don't want certain characters to do anything defensive, and ultimately they're just stun bots alongside damaging skills, but sometimes the AI are just not willing to do interactive things in the world, or sometimes they miss time or they overlap their stuns and their damage. But in terms of what I would strictly want to have changed for the future, now again, when it comes to the AI changes, they don't need to be revolutionary, but if a character needs you to be in the sky like Zeta for part of her kit, and the NPC is not even willing to do that, it feels a little bit weird, kind of scammed a little bit, because again, you'd expect certain characters that do a lot of damage to be really good for stuff like PvE or for killing random mobs. But with all these changes, I do think that Granblue Fantasy would be in a terrific spot, even if they're focused on other things. But ultimately, guys, even with all the new stuff like the raids and all the new characters that are coming out, and so even though a lot of the things that I wanted to call for when it comes to changes to the game are more quality of life based, I do want to mention that their direction of taking raids, and the reason why I don't really have many things to want or beg for in the future in terms of big brain ideas, and unless if they do something really weird like they mess it up, there's no real reason to complain, at least now. I'm gonna give it a try. Now, for the prior section, I was talking about more quality of life changes and things that I'd like to see to improve the game quality. The whole idea of adding new raids, adding new bosses, adding new characters are definitely things that do need to get added to the game to keep the game fresh and keep the game interesting. But outside of the few bosses and the characters that have been announced, I do hope that the next kind of bosses that the next bosses that they added still have some sort of like unique factor or unique like playstyle or unique mini game that you have to do within it. Just because, again, I think it would be fairly interesting. And again, I think more exciting things to get used to, or more things to farm for, are kind of what makes games like these go round. That's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Turn on the notification bell, subscribe. Let me know what kind of content you want to see next from this sort of video. As always, though, guys, that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you all in the next one. Adios.